Hello everyone, I'm LaceTV and today I'm continuing our review of Battle for Azeroth, this time on the core of BFA. I'll be focusing on everything that is in PvP, raiding or Mythic Plus, all of which will be covered in other videos. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it with zone design. Battle for Azeroth started strong with zone design. Both Kultiris and Zandalar gave us 3 unique zones to explore, each with its own theme and aesthetic. From the jungles of Zandalar to the deserts of Ul'dun, these zones were a breath of fresh air from Legion and really helped set the tone for the new expansion. As always with zone design, each zone is uniquely beautiful, whether it's the blood troll villages jutting out of the rancid swamps of Nazmir or the roving hills of Stormsong Valley. Each zone had a rich immersive feel to it. Borealis was a great hub city with everything the players needed within reach. Sadly, Desolore felt a bit too big, especially before flying. Having the ship for missions and transport to other continents so far away from the portals and bank was a huge drag compared to Borealis. For once, the Alliance came out on top and the Horde got the short end of the stick. Nazjatar and Mechagon came midway through the expansion and gave us 2 new zones to explore. The Mechagon Isle with a steampunk aesthetic was a welcome follow-up to the small hint of mechanomes tucked away in Styrigar Sound. Nazjatar, perhaps the most unique zone of the whole expansion, gave us a look at the bottom of the ocean with deep sea caves and coral reefs to explore. Finally, we had the Vale and Uldum redesigns with the Assaults of N'Zoth. It was nice to see the Vale restored to its former glory, even if it was just so N'Zoth could lay siege to it. With that being said, let's move on to the quests. Questing is rarely the highlight of an expansion, but it sure can be a lowlight if such a thing exists. Thankfully, Battle for Azeroth questing never felt like a drag, with each faction having their own 3 core zones with unique stories to flesh out the world that we would be living in for Battle for Azeroth. We think Blizzard did a great job. Whether it was venturing into Ul'dun and tracking down your missing soldier to a brainwashing cult, or tracking down the source of witchcraft in Drustvar, each zone had a full story to be told. Similar to Legion though, players typically could get through 1 or 2 zones before they were max level, and they didn't have much reason to continue, well until Pathfinder in patch 8.2, by which point it was a bit old news. Now, having the faction quest to invade and settle in enemy territory was interesting, we felt it had one main flaw. A lot of the setup for the dungeons were faction specific, with the faction invasion questlines being a bit brief and not having access to the other factions' questlines. Half the dungeons didn't have any story build up with quests for each faction. While the Horde had been working through the Blood Troll storyline, the Alliance had been busy following the story that leads into the Shrine of the Storm. But when the Horde shows up in Stormsong Valley and ends up in Shrine of the Storm, they don't really know the full story because they don't have access to the same questlines. Same with the Alliance in the Underrot. Although we loved each questline experience for the most part, it felt like a bit of waste for players who only got to experience one, and we lost a bit of clarity because of that. World quests and daily quests are difficult to pin down because it varies widely. The shell game is a fun minigame that's quick and relatively easy, but likewise protecting the turtles as they crawl, and we really mean crawl to the water, is slow and boring no matter how many crabs we have to shoot. The same goes for daily quests. Finding 3 rares can take 5 minutes or an hour depending on your luck. I mean, we would rather have more quests that you can show up to and complete without having to wait for a long ramp up time of turtles spawning or rares or chests to start appearing. But overall, there was a lot of variety throughout the expansion, with Nazjatar and now Uldum and Vale dailies to break up our daily routines. From questing, let's move on to the story. There's a lot to like about the story in Battle for Azeroth. Wamsamdi was a terrific addition to the game. Battling the last remaining Old God was really cool. Taking on one of the oldest characters in Warcraft franchise, in Jaina, I think we can all agree was pretty hype. But the cohesion of the story felt a bit lacking. For the first half of the expansion, it seemed to be setting up a Siege of Orgrimmar 2.0, but this time around with Sylvanas instead. It felt like Blizzard got cold feet and decided to pull N'Zoth out from the shadows at the last minute, and as such the story felt a bit out of sorts. BFA sadly felt like a lot of build up for Shadowlands, and it meant a lot of the stories didn't get the conclusions that you would have hoped for. We spent the whole expansion healing the wounds left from Sargeras' sword, and it's still there. We beat Jaina and nothing changed. I mean, she's still running around in Borealis. We beat Queen Ashara and now she's out wandering the void. It seems more changed in the Shadowlands cinematic than in the whole of BFA. Now let's move on to the reputations and Pathfinder. Once again we had to wait a long time to unlock flying with Pathfinder. While keeping us quite literally grounded, it served to help us explore the new zones, but we still feel like it could have come a bit sooner. You have to fully explore each zone to complete the story questlines for the Pathfinder achievement, and at that point we don't think you're missing out when you fly from one world quest to another. The reputations, while alt unfriendly, weren't too bad this expansion. Although the Uldum and Veil reputations are painfully slow, with changes to Essence unlocks coming at Revered, nothing felt too grindy. Well, until you had to do it all over again on your alt. And as we previously mentioned, the RNG of some quests, such as the Mechagon Raids or chests, made some reputation grinds really unenjoyable in Battle for Azeroth. Next, let's move on to the mounts and transmog. Battle for Azeroth started slow when it comes to both, we felt. The lack of tier sets we felt, and though the Horde received unique mounts for each of the 3 factions, the Alliance got 3 recolored horses, which felt like a slap in the face. Later in the expansion, Blizzard really seemed to hit the stride with mounts. The Mythic Jaina mount is terrific, and the Hive mount was a fun experience for a group of friends to puzzle out, and frankly, the B mount left us buzzing with excitement. That on top of the plethora of WARFRONT mounts that gave you a reason to return each cycle, and rewarded having max level alts. We were really spoiled for choice with mounts in Battle for Azeroth, even with that slow start. As for Transmog, it felt a bit underwhelming. The sets certainly match the aesthetic of the zones, dungeon and raids, but again, without tier sets there's a lack of class identity. You see someone running by and you think, letter transmog, not oh, there's a druid. It also didn't feel like there were any sets that really stood out, or that people really wanted. All these years later, you still see people running around in tier 3. In 5 years time, we don't think we'll be seeing any 10-man Uldir transmogs. Finally, we have the WARFRONT, AP and Islands. These 3 key features of the expansion, sadly for us, were 3 of the worst parts of this expansion. WARFRONTs we felt were a missed opportunity. Most of the player base played the WARFRONTs once or twice, then they got the gear they wanted, and well, it was no longer relevant and the content was ignored. That coupled with the fact that even the heroic versions were almost impossible to fail. We just don't think this content met the mark. Owning the territory was cool and gave access to some cool mounts, but once you had all the mounts there wasn't really anything to keep you going back. It felt like a lot of development time had been put into something that players really didn't invest any time into. In short, it just felt like a waste. Island expeditions, well, it didn't hit the mark. Like WARFRONTs, they were very easy, and even when farmed as efficiently as possible, they were boring. Monotonous content that nobody really enjoyed. Again, they dropped some cool looking mounts in Transmog, but nobody looked forward to it. It was never enjoyable content. Most players did them because they had to do them, and that can be said for a lot of content in Battle for Azeroth. Now the biggest problem with BFA was AP. The seemingly never-ending grind that forced players into endless islands and world quest swoops. I mean sure, it's always fun to slowly power up your character, but the grinds, particularly for AP this expansion, were just terrible. This on top of other mandatory grinds such as reputation for essences made this feel like the grindiest expansion yet. We understand that grinding is part of MMOs, but BFA really pushed the limit and not in a good way. Overall, we would give Battle for Azeroth a 2.5 out of 5. Sadly, some of the core features we felt were inherently flawed. Islands and WARFRONTs were far too easy. AP was a terrible grind, but the zones were great, questing was engaging, and tied well into the story for both dungeons and raid. And as a whole, the expansion was great for mount collectors too. But in the grand scheme of expansions, we think Battle for Azeroth is at the bottom of the pack. So that's it guys. For our review and rating, Mythic Plus in PvP, check out the Method channel and hit the subscribe button while you are at it. Also make sure to check out our latest Shadowlands updates. Anyways, until next time, I'm LaceTV, thank you so much for watching guys, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.